You're watching Morning at NTV.
A very good morning. Welcome to this edition of Morning at NTV's Big Story. And of course, how big can it get if it's not as big as the result that the country is staring in the face at coming in from the primary leaving examinations, whose results were released sometime last week. But of course, the repo effect and the repo discussions around the future of the education system in Uganda continues to take shape. This morning on the Big Story, we are looking at the later day question, the question that is regarded as the so what question. So we've had all these results coming in, a lot of performances regarded as good, many others regarded as bad, but in a country that clamors for excellence, after all, we are gearing up for middle income status, and therefore the quality of our human resource must be up there. The question we're asking ourselves is, what do these results represent with regard to building a formidable human resource that will carry this country forward? And to try and make sense of that question, I have with me Mr. Morrison Rakakamba, who in the previous life has worn so many hats, but this time around he comes in as an educationist. You are now holding the portfolio of Executive Director of Bridge Schools in Uganda. Good morning, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Simon, and good morning, viewers of NTV.
It would be nice to speak your mind on matters education, while previously we discussed with you matters politics, and I want to believe that now the red tie is not symptomatic of political inclinations, but certainly a fashion sense, as it were.
It should be a fashion sense, and we've discussed agriculture, we've discussed economics, and I'm happy to be here to kind of discuss also this education, because it is very, very central to transformation of any country.
I can't agree with you more.
Yeah.
You are the executive director of Bridge Schools. Bridge Schools have had their own fair share of bad press, but importantly, they have also had the explanation that they are out to, like the name suggests, bridge the gap of poor people not being able to access an education in a country that may, yes, have interventions to provide universal primary education, but you come in to give yet another intervention that buttresses government's efforts. And this year, especially, you receive your first PLE results.
Yes.
So let's start from there. How was your performance?
I think the performance was stellar, in a sense that for all the candidates that sat PLE, 100% of them passed and can go to secondary school, which means all of them are brought 28 aggregate. So most of them, really 93.5%, are in first grade and second grade. And for Bridge, I mean, these are kids, these are pupils who pay between 50,000 to 100,000.
Before you take me to the money,
these are in rural areas.
8%
so
have first and second grade.
Yeah, this is the
Do
point.
you have a third grade?
Yeah, there are few in third grade, so this is why I'm saying.
And no fourth grade?
Not at all. So this is why it's 100% pass rate, meaning all of them can go to secondary school. But for me, the most important point here is that these are not kids from Green Hill, these are not kids from Hillside, these are not from these, high-powered schools where, you and me pay 1.2 million, 1.5 million to have our kids in those schools. These are kids who are paying between 50,000 to 100,000 and who are receiving world-class education and can be able to really pass. So the learning gains in those schools is particularly stellar. And I think, like you mentioned in your first sentence, to buttress government efforts, to work with government, to partner with government. This is what Bridge is about, to make sure that we bridge all the remaining hurdles and make sure that we create a 21st century generation of kids who can go into school, learn, read, and really build their cognitive capacities at that level.
Well, of course, the argument has been that we sometimes register and celebrate these incredible results for even the 98% you're saying that is, first and second grade, and yet the numeracy of these children and their literacy levels remain below par. And I will widen my question beyond just the Bridge establishments. When you see this celebration of PLE results, do you get a sense of victory, or do you say it's yet another ritual where we are just sweeping through the chaff to the next level and it just continues like that?
No. I think the education sector is still going through a lot of challenges. I mean, if you look at UWEZO reports since 2009 that have been produced every other year, and last year, only late last year, you had this World Bank report that put only Uganda second to India in terms of kids who cannot read and count. So it's still a huge problem. I can say the foundations, for example, the universal primary education, were put in the Millennium Development Goals. And the focus was very much at that time on enrollment, on making sure that you have every child in school accessing a blackboard.
An
But
education of sorts.
An education of sorts. But there was never emphasis on what happens inside the classrooms. If they go to schools, are they actually learning? Or you have more schooling and you have less learning. And I'm happy that the Minister of Education and some people in the Education Ministry and members of Parliament are beginning to say, now, let's focus not on how schools like, but actually what happens inside those classrooms. So you have to have more textbooks reaching schools, such that you have a lower ratio of textbooks to pupils. That's solution number one. Solution number two, you have to make sure that teachers are not only in school, but they are also teaching. This is a country where we have over 56% of teachers who are absent on a daily basis.
And they're the same characters clamoring for
this
it.
and the Minister, Honorable Sen, in the speech actually mentioned it, that one of the challenges we have in this country is teacher absenteeism. So if you don't have teachers in schools teaching, there is no way you're going to achieve learning outcomes. For example, at Bridge, what we are trying, because we have only 2% of teacher absenteeism compared to 56% in the national one, what do? I think we need to move forward and say, how do we integrate technology in order to monitor absenteeism and make sure teachers in school? For instance, when I was entering here in the NTV studios, we had to lock in. When you lock in, then Simon Kasiate, you are sure I have entered the studios. But we have to go ahead and say, okay, we have Kasiate is in the studios, but is he actually delivering what he's supposed to deliver? So at Bridge, how do we do that? So we use technology to make sure that if a teacher is in the class and is flipping this mathematics class, logs in on the teacher computer, is flipping through the lesson. When I'm seated at the headquarters in Kampala, I am really looking at what is going on in the classroom. So if you are a government seated at the ministry headquarters, you are running thousands, hundreds of thousands of schools, hundreds and thousands of teachers. It is very, very difficult and expensive to send education inspectors, fuel, money, resources to get all that data. So we have to be technologically driven, and I think the Minister of ICT and Information has also been talking about that. We have to be technologically and IT driven to make sure that we monitor in order to achieve efficiency.
But that said, there's efficiency and teaching and learning, as you call it, but then there's when you have a curriculum that perhaps does not answer to today's evolving global needs. In your view, as someone in the education sector, do you think there is need to look into our curriculum and perhaps change a few things, like asking in the SST examination how many districts Uganda has? And I do not know whether that's a bad thing. I mean, it's always important for kids to know their civics. But when you start asking me about Hesketh Bear and when Cotton came to Uganda and Islam, I don't know. Do you think
what is going
curriculum
on
needs to be changed?
What is going on is that there is an ongoing curriculum review at the Ministry of Education.
Oh, is there?
Yes. What we want as stakeholders or actors in the education sector is that these kind of conversations should be hugely consultative to make sure that really all the stakeholders are on board and that they capture the imagination of the country. If you have Vision 2040, what is it about and what kind of generation of children, of citizens, of human resources do you want to create? So I think it should be human-centered. First of all, I have heard rumors that some people are trying to remove physics, to remove science, to remove chemistry. But if you want to create a 21st, a 22nd generation country, it has to be driven by STEM, science, technology, mathematics. Those are the kind of things that created for United States, for China, for Malaysia, the Silicon Valley. So, but at the same time, we have to also embed the culture, embed the values of the country. This is why at pre-primary, there is also still, the policy is also still in the work. The kids are it's supposed to be about the learning environment. It's supposed to be about the home environment. So we have to embed our ambitions. If we want to create a manufacturing country, I mean, all those things have to be started at the primary, at the early levels of education to make sure that you prepare cognitively these peoples. If we want to be an IT-driven country, services-driven country, an agriculture-driven country, transforming agriculture, all these things should be embedded. So yes, whereas the healthcare bill, the living stones, and all those histories are important, but I think the focus should be on the actual practical things of getting things done.
And talking about practical things, of course, not all of us are going to make a living in our future from academic accolades that we receive in school. Like I was telling Joel earlier on, in primary school, I always made it to the log of those who are disrupting the class by talking. Now I am earning a living through talking. There are those who will be very fast like gazelles on the playing field, but certainly are unable to add 1 and 1 in class. Those need to be supported because
absolutely, I do agree.
So
sports,
how do we make an all-round person in school and examine them from an all-round perspective? Because you could be an incredible drama artist. I mean, incredible guys who act and do all sorts of interesting things, but you're never examined on that. So you go through the examination system and appear to have been a failure because you can answer mathematics questions, and yet you are such an incredible talent when it comes to an unexaminable examination.
Simon Kasiate, I mean, you're 100% right. And this is why I said that any curriculum must be centered around the development of an individual. A whole individual in their own, all their capacities. It should tickle all their capacities, to be explored, and excel. I mean, somebody, I think this Professor Nwagawa, who is say that the amount of money that Wayne Rooney earns, could be equal to some almost GDPs of countries. I mean, you don't need Rooney to be a professor teaching mathematics at Cornwall University, not at all. But he's a soccer player. You have Usain Bolt doing a lot of stuff for his country, Jamaica, and bringing a lot of tourism in that country. So I think this is why I said, look at the country's ambitions and make sure that you build a wholesome curriculum that makes sure that you develop this human individual to excel and reach their potential. For example, building confidence, in our children is something very important. Building children and citizens who are confident, who are curious, who are imaginative, who ask the questions, who don't just cram and take in everything and don't regurgitate and don't ask the hard questions. So if you don't have a curious population, if you don't have an imaginative population, then you are not going to have an innovative kind of population, and you're not going to have success as a country.
Let me bring in the elephant in the room as we conclude this one. Morrison, of course, education service provision in this country is by and large a huge business. Let's not kid ourselves. Yes, there are government-aided schools, the traditional schools as we know them, but we also know that a number of private players are coming here to offer this service, and they don't do so much because they care about the education system in this country. Morrison, what we see is entrepreneurs who are setting up schools because they know there is a demand and they are providing for the supply, and they ought to make money. And so for them, the hallmark of a successful education institution is how many foes they can churn out and how well they can market them in the newspapers. That's why these newspapers are going to go on ad infinitum until sometime this week, when now UCE will come in and the same cycle starts again. Because people are out there to market their schools. You've seen those who say we give our foes 1 million shillings and they're posing with them. All that is not a culture of promoting education per se, but it is a marketing culture to say this is the school to send your child to. Do you think, in your view, as someone now participating in the arena of education, that business or entrepreneur desires to reap huge dividends out of business ventures is in one way or another compromising the quality of our education and creating some kind of success bubble, which, if poked, inside it lies vanity?
No. I think how you need to look at it is, I think today, was it the Daily Monitor that came up with this headline, that says these are schools that improved from last year. And I think UNEB is coming up with a very interesting measure called value added. And this value added is to look at the entire growth of a child, in a school, not necessarily what the kids achieve in terms of results at the end of the PLE or UCE exams. So how it works, Simon, is you look at what did a kid get at P7, this PLE. Somebody got a 4, for example. Somebody got first grade. They enter Budo College or Budo High School. Once they reach senior 4, you look, this kid who got 4, how did this kid perform, at senior 4? Are they still in first grade? Are they still stellar? So if they are still at stellar performance or very good performance, then you know that school is consistent and it adds value. But imagine a school like Makowore in Rukunjiri, okay? Kids enter from P7, they are in 3rd grade, for example. But when they are churned out at senior 4, these kids who entered when they were in 3rd grade at PLE, they are actually now in second grade and some are in first grade. For me, that school has done well, better than Budo, that received only kids with 4. This school has added practical value to this child who entered at a low base and at the end line has come out on a better side. So I think there is a need to transform how we measure performance. So whereas the marketing is not necessarily bad, if it can be a stimulant to make kids really want to excel, be in newspapers, it can also be an incentive, by the way. I don't think we should look at the business sense and advertising in a bad sense. It can stimulate the imagination and excite the parents and excite people and get everybody to want to like education and get kids to want to be on the front page, which is okay. But as a government, through regulation, through engagement, through measures like UNEB is putting in place like value added, I think that can be good. 2 is to look at the entire experience of a child in a classroom. What is it that the teachers do with these children in the 30 to 40 hours of class per week? So the experience between the teacher and the child and the exposure to the learning and practical learning of doing things and revising and repeating these things and doing them, I think is also going to be very important, especially if you're looking at the real progress of this child over and above what they write in exams.
Quite very interesting. And so, as we conclude, Morrison, of course, looking at the primary level, there is when you have day schools, boarding schools. You've got schools that have flexi time, where it's not that you must be there at 8 o'clock. You can be there maybe 9 o'clock and extend to 6, how they do it. But also you've got a situation where 4 a.m. you find kids are crammed up in shuttles, going to be shuttled to schools, and then after 6 you see some of them carrying bags heavier than what you can be allowed to carry on a Boeing 707 for a transatlantic trip because it's so heavy with books. What would you conclude by saying is the state of our education? And we sometimes pumping our children with a lot more than they actually need for those 8 hours of PLE.
I have heard some people talking about high pitched, like at Bridge, where we have more hours actually in class in order to ensure that learning happens, because learning is a huge problem, not only in Uganda, but across Africa. I think that kids should have really more hours in terms of doing both the academic work, but also doing the physical exercise, also doing, other skills in schools that build the confidence. I think that is important. But also kids should have the normal holiday, which they are supposed to have. This is why things like coaching, when it is holiday time, I think those things are really not necessary. Kids at the end of the day should be allowed to be kids, should be allowed to play, should be allowed to experience different environments. If they live in the city, they should be allowed to go to Rukunjiro, go to Amdat, where the parents come from, and spend a holiday with their grandparents. I think that's important. But when kids are in school, I think they should start on time and end on time. So this is why teacher absenteeism, which we've been talking about, at what time do teachers clock in? When they clock in, they are in school. When they're in school, are they actually teaching? So why you have coaching, why you have all these other things is that there is poor time management, if you ask me, within schools, to the extent that teachers are not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
In Bridge, do you monitor who teaches
Absolutely.
what? Do you have a teaching plan for every teacher? And you
we have
centrally?
We have what we call standardized lesson plans that allow teacher more time to focus on actually the learning of the child, and we are recommending that to government, and the discussions are on, although we haven't succeeded in that, but we think it's very important, just like we have standardized exams, to have standardized lessons, such that teachers really have more time. We think that that's really important. But when teachers clock in, back to your question, how we monitor them is that when they are flipping through these standardized lessons, we are centrally or technologically able or have the capacity to know that this teacher is in class and actually teaching. So that's really important. And we are saying if we don't do that, it's really going to be very, very expensive for any government or for any actor in the education system to be able to monitor the multitudes of teachers who are supposed to be in school and teaching, and you have no way to figure that out. So we cannot be trapped in the past of how we had few schools, we had committed inspectors of schools who would go and check lesson plans and schemes of work. That can no longer be tenable to do or humanly possible, and it is going to be very, very expensive. So to be efficient, government has to go edutech, education technology, and at Bridge Schools. That's a service offering that we have, and we are willing to really partner with government, partner with the minister, partner with the parliament to make sure that we deliver 21st century education system.
Morrison Rakakamba, Executive Director of Bridge International Schools, we can thank you more for taking time off your busy schedule.
Always an honor to come
have
here
this conversation
and
with
catch
us.
up. Yeah.
And to believe that our viewers this morning, especially those who are still, glutting with the success of their PLE, are taking keen interest in what you've just said. But even those who are preparing to be candidates this year or next year, or even who are just going through the education system, or even those who are parents or raising children that are going through this education system, must have found this conversation quite a bit insightful, to the extent that now you begin to also appreciate what your role can be in making your child a better person for the good of this country. Let's take a breather. When we return, it's more quality programming here on Morning at NTV. We'll return tomorrow, same time, same place, with yet another conversation on the big story. Good morning.